Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
Always keeping me on my toes, thank you, and not knowing when to start my response. It's going very well, Walt. Welcome everyone, welcome back to Awesome Truth. We are watching a documentary today. We're talking about a documentary today that we watched recently. A new documentary, one that came out very recently. One with the WWE Network documentary brand on it, Walt, which is funny because for most people listening, that service no longer exists. But I guess it lives on as the name of a documentary type.
Yeah, I guess this is WWE's, attempt at telling the life story of Ric Flair.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you didn't know from the name of the episode and from that, we're talking about Woo becoming Ric Flair, which is a new Peacock documentary that, as we said, has the network shine on it. It is, I think it might be their first release on Peacock. Is that right, Walt? Or do we miss something like with this sort of like original style brand? Like obviously they're still churning out network related content, the 365s and such. I believe there's some of that coming, but this might be this felt like as a standalone special sort of thing that they don't turn out too often.
Yeah, this might have been. I don't actually know because I couldn't find it when I went into like the WWE section of Peacock. I had to search for it.
I think it's in like movies. I think it counts as like a straight up movie, right? Like a real documentary.
It might be a Peacock kind of branded thing and not necessarily WWE brand, even though it's clearly WWE branded to.
Yeah, once you start it, that's the production still that comes up, but. Yeah, I think they do sort of keep it in a place reserved for, actual documentaries with feature-style documentaries and such. But, I mean, lengthwise, this is a feature-style documentary. This is an hour and 51 minutes long, so sure. It's a lot of Ric Flair.
I saw that. I'm just like, oh, boy, we're in trouble.
Yeah, if you finish this in one swoop, good for you, because I sure did not. This was a two-nighter for me, without a doubt.
With commercials too, because I don't have that premium Peacock. I have the poor man's version of it, so it's probably over 2 hours.
Yeah, it's long. It's very long. And Walt, what we need to talk about certainly as we get going here is we've talked about so much Ric Flair content, literature, coverage on this show. We've told the story of Ric Flair. We've heard the story. We've chatted about it. We've talked to Keith Elliott Greenberg, friend of the show, who wrote the Ric Flair biography and is in this documentary. We've covered Rick up and down, left and right. And yet just when we think, okay, we're done here, more is released, more Ric Flair story. It just seems like that people cannot get enough of talking about Ric Flair.
I mean, this is clearly a subjective bias take, but Keith was easily the best part of
seeing him, he looks great too. I feel like knowing him as we know him as real people, I love his look regardless. But I feel like if you were watching this and you didn't know, talking heads come and go in these things, I'd be like, that guy looks cool. I want to know more about that guy. He is interesting looking.
Also, Keith has a way of describing wrestling history that doesn't make it feel stale too. He does a good job at summing up these small bits of history and these small pods of Rick, giving that extra context of Ric Flair's story. So A++ there.
Yep. Keith is great. He's a wonderful part of this documentary, and I'm glad they get him because he's an outside source. He is a definitive chronicler of Ric Flair's story, which is good and useful. But again, Ric Flair's story, we've just heard it so many times. There's been the 30 for 30, there's books, there's other docs, there's just so much Flair out there. The Dark Side of the Ring has covered him in detail now in various ways. We've just gotten so much Flair. I'm sure the reason this exists is because Ric Flair draws eyeballs, Ric Flair draws numbers. It's, he's one of the most famous, beloved wrestlers of all time. So I imagine that's why they keep doing it. But I'm just, as for you and I, hosts of the Wrestling Book Club podcast, I'm just we really got to do more Flair. This is all you got.
I mean, this could have been in production for a long time and then buried once the Dark Side episode. I mean, I have no idea. Truly on concept and on paper, I don't understand why we're retelling this story, especially at a time when Ric Flair was, unfortunately, Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan and those older stars just no matter how many times we think they're going to be persona non grata forever, it's like, just kidding, they're back, and we have seemingly forgotten all their sins.
Yeah, they took 3-4 months away from the spotlight, and now they're back on Raw, strutting and being cool.
Yeah, but I mean, like, just take that out of the equation. I know that's hard to do for pretty much everybody, but let's just like table that for a second, because I don't understand what the pressing need was for this. And I say that because we just did a 30 for 30 seemingly like 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Let me look that up. We very recently, for sure. Like it's not like it was a decade ago. It's not like tons of new things have happened in between.
Right.
We did the Ric Flair. The plane ride from hell was last September, or last August. And then the 30 for 30 was a little while ago.
2017, I'm going to say?
Yeah, it was 2017. So, I mean, we did a long time ago on this show, hundreds of episodes, or dozens of episodes ago. But yeah, 4, 5 years, 6 years ago.
And he has his health scare in 2019. So, like, yes, there was new Ric Flair story to unfold between 2017 and the release of the 30 for 30 and today. A lot of it not good, and a lot of it was very scary because he almost dies. And it's like, but ultimately I bring up the 30 for 30, and this is the last time I'll make the comparison, is like, there, not 90% of this was rehashing and retelling that story. And if that didn't exist, this would be like really captivating. And it was, the presentation was good, but like, we just did this like pretty recently. And then you have like Tom Rinaldi like narrating and interviewing. It's like, you didn't even differentiate from ESPN because you have a sports journalist like narrating this. It's like this. If you didn't know better, you would think you're watching the 30 for 30 is what it comes down to. It's like, that's not enough for me to invest in your 2-hour doc.
Yeah, if you put this on for someone who was not super media savvy and just said, they'd be like, "Oh, that's the third." Like you wouldn't know the difference. You wouldn't unless you go into Peacock and be like, "I'm watching the Peacock version of this." But there really is no Peacock. It's different branding. It's different a name for the same thing. It's the Ric Flair story, you know. And yeah, I just don't his coverage of his career, his life, his choices is just so exhaustive, you know. And it's a good story. Like we've praised it before on this show. Like the elements of it that explain how wrestling used to be, its meteoric rise in the 80s. Ric Flair is one of the chief characters of that decade and every decade to come, is all key to understanding what wrestling is, how it functions, its flaws, how it breaks people. Like it's all good stuff. Like it's all infrastructurally important to what wrestling is as an entity. But I just don't know, like you said, this is just different versions of the same thing. I just don't know what the 4, 5, whatever many years in between the 30 for 30, not so much has happened that I feel like we must reassess Ric Flair. Or at the very least, the thing, as you hinted at, things that have happened are bad things. The things that we've learned about Ric Flair in between are that he is an addict and was a sexual harasser at best, you know, certainly a sexual deviant, and treated women very poorly, you know, like just a lot of very negative things, which apply to wrestlers beyond just him. But as the person who gets a lot of the limelight, he has also had to stand in the spotlight and take a lot of the blame and have his flaws exposed as being, you know, one of the chief abusers and you know, troublemakers and probably not great dudes of the previous era.
I was surprised and shocked that this doc went so it was so tone deaf at times, and I'm not sure if it's like they've decided that enough time has passed from the backlash of Dark Side of the Ring and the plane ride from hell that this is fair game again. But you know, we were saying this 2017 where it's like, wow, they're talking about the baby's apple and like Space Mountain, and that's kind of dirty and kind of like it's a little like, it was way too much then in 2017. In 2023, after all of that, and we have like a substantial amount of time, like minutes, talking about Space Mountain and his love for women, and just Rick laughing his love for women, and like tone deaf is a word that comes to mind, and it's just like I can't even think of a good word because there's just a lot of bad words that come to mind. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like, who thought that was a good idea? And what did we learn? Like, it's not like I learned something new or like I can sympathize. It's like, oh, we've learned nothing.
One of the things I like about the Ric Flair story that we have read and has been dissected in ways big and small, in ways thoughtful and casual, is that Ric Flair projected this huge persona, bigger than life, coolest guy in the room, all the girls, all the fun, but in reality was a terrified man who was playing a character permanently almost. Like burned into his brain was this character of Ric Flair, and the guy inside was always trying to just keep ahead of his own fears, his own insecurities, and then at various points in his career, they catch up with him. He has little to big breakdowns, pulls himself back together, et cetera, et cetera. You know, like there's a really good story there, I think, of and Ric Flair, in a lot of the retellings of that story, has been very honest about his anxieties, his frailties, his failings, you know, in a lot of ways. Not always, not about everything, but about a lot of ways. And when you watch a doc like this, and like you said, it praises him, and it focuses on, like, rappers think he's cool, you know, athletes think he's cool, you know, like yes, I understand why they think that. I think Ric Flair, in many ways, is cool, too, especially, you know, his character in the 80s is super cool. But, like, to act like that is an overriding element. You know, people think he's cool versus the real person and the real struggles he went through, and not shining a light on those. That feels the most, maybe not tone deaf, but just outdated. You know, like I like to think of Ric Flair as a cautionary tale at this point to a certain extent. Like the highest highs, and then maybe not the lowest lows, but like some real fucking low lows. Like he's alive, he's made it through. You know, of all wrestlers from his era, he is one of the sole survivors in this way to still have this sort of aura around him and success and all that stuff. But he flew too close to the sun, and he you know, lived the gimmick, and it cost him in a lot of ways. And I don't think this documentary is honest enough about what that is. And it just makes me feel shitty a little bit, because I want to believe that Rick has been good about that. I know, especially in Keith's book that Keith co-authored with him, he was good about that before, but maybe in his twilight years, maybe he's a little over that, and now sounds like he's just trying to have some fun before he kicks the bucket.
You know, cautionary tale is like a good term to use here. When I was watching it, my girlfriend, who I successfully did not convince to sit down with me and watch, I didn't push too hard, to be honest, because, you know, why would I? That's ridiculous. I gladly will suffer this alone.
She's not a co-host of Awesome Truth. She's not obligated to watch any of this.
But she, you know, she was doing other stuff, and she just turns, she's like, "This is a documentary on mental illness," and then leaves the room. And I'm like, you know, she might just be applying that to wrestlers and wrestling in general, and maybe even wrestling fans, and I can't argue with that. But to me, that kind of really did describe this experience. It's like, this kind of is like this tortured guy who never felt self, like, any level of like confidence, and was always battling something behind the scenes, and created the world's greatest wrestling, and I guess the point they're trying to make is like beyond wrestling persona, to mask all of these, like, you know, addictions or guilt or trauma at times. And it's, you know, I don't know, that to me that resonated. I'm like, yeah, it kind of is that.
And you know, I feel like the documentary is either checking off boxes or giving itself a little bit of credit by addressing all of these things very quickly and very lightly. You know, like, It touches on, like you said, the things that give him anxiety later in life, the way he was neglected as a child, the plane crash he was in, which obviously changed his whole career, changed his body type, changed how he looked at the world. Like, there is trauma there, and there is, you know, and the walls he put up. Like, the documentary touches on all this stuff a little bit, but then again, at the end, it's just like, yeah, but man, Ric Flair, Post Malone thinks he's cool, you know, like, it just, It brushes it all away at the end. But it's like, no, but what I'm seeing here, and what your girlfriend is, I think, seeing is a 75-year-old man who's dancing around in a robe and looks like death warmed over, like, and and yet continues playing this character at an age when he should just be sitting quietly and like hanging out with his grandkids and like watching TV and going for long walks by the lake, you know? Like he doesn't, but he can't do that. And I guess you can look at that as admirable. I think most people, most modern wrestling fans that I know at least, would, if not condemn him, then at least raise an eyebrow and go, what are you doing? Like, why must you keep doing this? What is broken inside you that you can't stop being Ric Flair?
And that's not a thing that most wrestlers, I feel like modern wrestlers don't act like that, aren't really like that anymore. I mean, maybe there's some that live the gimmick or can't separate themselves from the characters. And I know that's like such a wrestling thing. It's like, you are the character or 24/7. It's like this guy, but this is to a fault. This is like to a, like legal detriment, to like mental detriment, to, and
medical detriment,
like, almost dies in 2019 because he just is drinking all the time.
Yeah,
and
drinks himself basically to death, to the brink of death, and yet we're still supposed to go, oh, that's the Ric Flair life. It's like, no, It doesn't have to be. It does not. No one's making him do this but himself.
With zero reflection afterwards. Like, so you're still drinking. Why are you still drinking? It's like, because I like it.
Yeah, he said it's fun, right? He's like, what did he compare it to again? I forget. Like, it was some like activity, like a hobby, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like going to the movies or like scuba diving or something. I wish I didn't write this down. He compares it to a literal activity as if it's like a fun thing you do. It's like, no. I mean, I like having a drink as much as anybody, but I wouldn't put it on like my activities list on like my resume, you know, or describe it that way to a new friend. Oh, I love drinking. Like, no, it's not a badge of honor.
I had 2 drinks last night, and I was like, I felt horrible this morning. It's like, this guy's 70 and drinking from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day. It's like,
and again, he cries when telling the story of the binge drinking and of the day drinking and of the post death of his son drinking. Like, he seems to understand that there were times when it got away from him and totally ruined his life. But then he seems to also be like, well, there are other times when I have it under control, and so it's okay. And it's like, no, like, you're an addict. Like, I know you're an old man addict and you're a wrestling legend addict, and there's all these sort of caveats that let you live your life differently than most people who would be living it in your shoes, but you're still an addict. Like, it doesn't, everyone seems to sort of get that to a certain extent, but then they sort of lose the thread at some point, and then it becomes somewhat okay again.
Yeah, I mean, I want to separate the drinking as a result of coping with the loss of his son to like just the previous 50 years of him drinking before that. I mean, you want to be careful, but at the same time, like, we're talking about this so loosely, and him describing like the rehab stint, is kind of horrifying in many ways. And it's just like, it's almost like there's the moments where he's masking pain when he's drinking, and then there's like, oh, but then when he's happy, he's drinking. So it's like, well, so he's just drinking. Like, so it's easy. It's almost easy to separate them in many ways, because it's like that was a theme throughout the documentary. It wasn't even like, oh, and then it started ramping up. It's like it was always at an 11.
Yeah,
no matter what.
And it's not like we are reading between the lines here, or like armchair psychologizing this, you know, or saying like, Ric Flair seems like an alcoholic. He's telling us in the documentary that he's an alcoholic. Like, he's been to rehab, and yet he keeps drinking, and he almost died, and he keeps drinking. Like, we're not, making guesses here. Like, this is the reality of the situation that he describes and brags about and laments at the same time.
And I mean, like, addiction is a thing that has plagued his family, and it's like we're laughing about it by hour 2 of this gargantuan retelling of his life. I'm just like, I guess it's funny. I mean, I don't think it's that funny, but sure.
Yeah.
If he thinks it's funny, then good for him. I don't know.
I have such, and I'll blame the documentary for this, even though, because the person is complicated, and I don't want to, like, I'll to talk about what he puts on screen for us, but, I definitely, there is a point where it's like, okay, now we are probably getting too in the weeds and speculating how he lives his life. But the documentary sets it up as, telling us the first hour is basically the story of Ric Flair a little bit the man and mostly, the wrestler, I would say, right? Like the beginning of as a childhood is maybe 15 minutes tops, and then it's about 45 minutes of NWA, WCW, WWE, which is like the wrestling career of Ric Flair, which is great. And we've heard that story a million times, but it's very well done, has a nice sheen on it, like it's fancy, it's well produced, like I enjoy all that. And then we dip into, the stuff with his family, the struggles in raising kids, and the addiction elements you're talking about. Like, it's just the way it is put together, the way it is structured, the way they lay it all out is just very strange to me. Like, the tone deafness, as you put it, is so starkly apparent in the last 45 minutes or so, where it's family stuff, his own problems, bouncing back, health scares. Like, it's all these deeper, more personal, more intimate things, but it's not packaged as like a cohesive start to finish. Here's the life of this guy. We're not connecting A to B to C. We're not making it all one thing. It's just sort of like a series of tidbits, like and it doesn't seem to realize that some of the things it's saying contradict the other things, like you said, Rick is clearly an addict. His son unfortunately was an addict who passed away, but it doesn't ever try and weave those into one tale. It just sort of leaves them there for you. And I guess you deal with it what you will, but I don't see how you can't look at that and say, like, this is a somewhat haunted family, probably from a lifetime of decisions, but certainly, things have gone awry, as they do for many families, but certainly the one we're talking about here. But then, like you said, at the end, they put a bow on it, and we're all dancing around and having a good time. And it's just like, I don't understand why, those disparate pieces were put together in this fashion with seemingly no thought as to what go. Like, I don't know. It feels very. I don't even want to say haphazard because it's well done, but I just don't. I don't get what the overall thesis is or what we're supposed to take away from Ric Flair at the end as a person, as a wrestler, as everything.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Especially at the end, it gets very like disjointed. It's just like we're just bouncing from like thing to thing. Pop culture icon almost dies. Last match, maybe. It's like
Charlotte's here. She's, the Reed was arguably supposed to be Reed, and now it's Charlotte who's the star. But don't worry about that. Like, it's just there's all this stuff there, and I'm like, huh, what? And then you're moving on to the next thing.
And so I'm just gonna make one point about the Reed aspect of this. I can't imagine being a producer. I can't imagine it. I don't want to for this doc and asking this guy to tell this story again. Like it reminds me of like time being in like true crime where like I worked on certain shows where it's like, listen, we want to get the word out. Like we want to tell the story. Yes, it's for it's for like television. Yes, it's for entertainment, for ad sales dollars for some crime network. But like, there were certain shows that had like a little bit of like honor to it where it's like, well, this is putting out for new leads. Then there's just like straight up murder porn shows where it's like, hey, we're going to have this poor family sit down and talk about the death of X person. And it's just like the first time, maybe it's cathartic. Maybe it's like by the sixth time we're telling this person's story, it's like, now this is getting dirty. And I have a lot of friends in the space who are just like, I can't believe we're telling this story again. Like, and I have to be the one to like contact the family and set up an interview. It's like, yeah, I feel you, because like watching Rick tell that story again, I'm just like, at some point, if you're like doing this, it's like, we're going to make this poor guy tell this story of his dead son again. Like, how many times are we going to make him sit there and cry and we're going to film it for 2 hours? Like, at some point it gets fucking dirty, and I hate that.
Yeah, and I this is me editorializing because I have no idea, obviously, how this is going on with Rick and his family or why they agree to tell this story so much. But there's a part of me that feels like someone needs to protect him from himself in situations like that. Like, he doesn't need to make a documentary about his life where he tells that Reed story again. It doesn't have to be part of the story the way they do it here. They don't have to play the 911 call of Ric Flair screaming because his son is dying. Yeah. Like, they don't have to do that. It's not that necessary of an element of the Ric Flair, the pro wrestler story. It's certainly not an element of this documentary that sometimes tells story of Richard Flair, the human being, but then bounces back and forth and doesn't really seem to know where it's going. It just doesn't add anything. Like you said, it feels pornographic. It feels inappropriate. It feels like we're encroaching on someone's life for no gain. There's no cautionary tale. I don't know what it means in the way it's used in this documentary, which makes it to me feel very, very gross.
If this was the first time, like, and I'm not saying that it's right the first time. Like, I'm not trying to pass judgment. Like, I understand, I get it, but also, like, if this was the first documentary of let's film Ric Flair walking to his son's like memorial and like say metaphorically saying goodbye again, like, yeah, it's like we already did that in 2017, and we're gonna do the same thing again. It's like, yeah, I could see touching upon it because like it's such a big part of his story, but like we're gonna bring a remote camera crew to this guy's memorial again and watch him cry over this memorial one more time. It's just like that scene. Like there's a line, and it's different for viewers, or like that crossed the line. I don't care who you are. Like that's like, it's like we're doing this again. Like for what purpose?
For a documentary called Woo Becoming Ric Flair, too, you know? It's not like,
Right.
it's not the inside story of Ric Flair. It's not, you know, again, everything does not have to tie up into a neat package, but it's not telling you the trials and tribulations of being a pro wrestler. Like that's just that's a very small part of this documentary, if at all. And yet, like you said, we're still getting all this very serious, very, you know, intimate look at the saddest thing to ever happen to him. And I just don't know why that belongs in Woo Becoming Ric Flair.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean,
there's no answer. It's just what it is. And like I said, that's why, again, totally me speaking, I sometimes wish Rick wouldn't do this. You know, like he I feel like he's addicted is a strong word here. Like, as I know I use that. That's a very real thing that he's been through. His family's been through. It feels like he cannot turn the cameras away sometimes. You know, he cannot turn down an opportunity to turn on the charm, go on TV, dance around, smile, be fun, be the cool guy. To me, it's more sad than fun. Like, it reminds me of Ric Flair from 40 years ago, which I'm like, okay, that's enjoyable to me to remember, but I just don't want to see a 75-year-old man doing this. Like, I don't think he's debasing himself, but I also don't think he's doing himself any favors or making himself seem cool or relevant or sympathetic or whatever he's going for. I just wish it would stop.
yeah, I mean, maybe, and honestly, you're right. Maybe like this is what he wants. He wants to just like get a camera on him and he'll talk about anything and just to get the camera. And like, maybe that's true. And you know,
but like at the end of the documentary, so they, like you said, they addressed the last match that he had recently. I believe was a tag match involving Jay Lethal. Is that right?
and Jeff Jarrett.
And Jeff Jarrett and somebody else. I don't even remember who all the people were involved. But it was a tag match. Ric Flair was there. He's very old. He should not be wrestling under any circumstances. But he wrestled a match, and it was over, and everyone's like, whew, he survived. Like, thank God. And then he goes on and does more stuff, you know? And, like, he's on Instagram, I'm never going to retire. He goes to Puerto Rico and gets involved in a match. Like, but the documentary sells that as, like, that incorrigible Ric Flair, you know? He can't sit
Yuck,
still.
yuck, yuck.
But it's not, you know, it's so like, you're a very old man. Like, why are we presenting that as even remotely a positive? Like, it's just not. If he wants to show up at conventions and shake hands and sign autographs, good, he should do that. Like, that's free money. Like, I enjoy that he's doing that. If he wants to stay in the ring and he wants to put himself at risk, and I just don't know how we can celebrate that at all or treat it like it's not an organic, natural part of a wrestling career. Like, it's a man who cannot say no.
Yeah, an organic part of a wrestling career. Like, I feel like we skimmed through the meat of his career yet again too. It's like, man, I would like to actually learn more about. I mean, this sounds so stupid. The dumb wrestling podcast host wants to learn more about the wrestling part of this guy's life, but like that's certainly a different way in. It's like, you know, take a deeper dive into the Four Horsemen. What were their best matches? Tell me more about like the some of the biggest feuds with Dusty. You have the archives, you have the footage.
Yeah.
Let's learn a little bit more about why the Horsemen were so damn important, other than like Keith is saying the Horsemen were so damn important. And, you know, great context, great interview bite. You have the footage to show me and to contextualize a little bit more. Like, that would be a different way into Ric Flair's career and life. Like, you know, we just take for granted sometimes that he's the greatest wrestler, but like you don't actually explain why he was great
Yep.
other than his personality, which is only part of being a wrestler.
Or tie it into like if you want to like purport to do something innovative or in depth, tie it into like the '80s where Flair is the rich guy and Dusty's the working guy in like the Reagan '80s. Like what the dynamics of the time he wrestled in, the character he was playing. Like there's meat on the bone there that I think is nerdy and somewhat specific to you and I as fans, but I think also ties it into a larger narrative. Like the wrestling boom, like wrestling was getting so big and Ric Flair was a big part of it. How did he bring it to the masses? Like how did he get so popular and so intriguing? Like the documentary, like you said, they basically say like, well, he was really magnanimous and had a big personality, and so everyone loved him. And it's like that's not how it works. Like there's so many wrestlers that have that and don't do shit with it. Like what was it about Ric Flair that made him special? They just don't have any interest in doing that, and it does feel like I'd rather spend 20 minutes on that than what we spend 20 minutes at the end talking about instead.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll get the Horseman story in Arn Anderson's comic book coming out instead, and I guess maybe that's fine. But and Ric Flair's story is going to be all about him creating quote unquote one of the greatest wrestling personalities ever, or like pop culture icon, whatever's. But he was also a wrestler, so we talked a lot about the WrestleMania match, the retirement match, I don't know. I'm just putting on my development hat, oh, how would I develop a Ric Flair documentary? Because I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's we keep doing these docs, and we keep asking myself who's this for again? Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So.
I really don't know. I like it does not. I mean, the sad part, which you probably said before, is it's not for anybody per se. It's just content, It's creating content.
Yeah.
And we don't know, as you stated at the top, the reasons why this exists. Whether this was a Kevin Dunn idea, a WWE idea, a Ric Flair idea, some other producer's idea. We don't know where this came from. All we know is that it exists now, and we try and apply some context to it. Like, why could this be? What happened lately or recently that would give this weight? And the answer is nothing really, beyond the fact that he got sick and he had a match. Which is fine. It just doesn't for the presentation of, like you said, this sort of broader themed outside WWE wrestling doc. You would just think there would be some reason for it to be. If this was one of a series, we're doing Stone Cold, we're doing Hogan, we're doing Rock, we're doing Flair, Cena, okay. Doesn't seem to be part of anything like that. It just seems to be a one-off Ric Flair story. And again, why? Who asks for more of that? I don't know. And it's annoying because I guess you could sit back and watch this without a care in the world and just say, oh, Ric Flair, good story. I don't know. We can't do that. And I think most wrestling fans wouldn't do that either. And so then you just ask the questions, and there's no real good answers for that.
Yeah, I think you said it best, where it's this isn't for anybody. It's just content. It's right, because first off, hey, I have a crazy pitch. Let's do a documentary on one of the most famous wrestlers of all time for our wrestling streaming platform. Wow. Okay.
Sold in the room.
It's sold. Yeah. It's sold so well that we did it. We're doing it every year for a different service. It's okay. And also too, it's when you put that in that perspective, it's is anyone no one's getting Peacock for the Ric Flair, the exclusive, not even exclusive, a Ric Flair doc, the same way they're not going for whatever in your house is next,
Yep.
It's it's not going to drive subs. It's just reinforces the content machine.
Yep. Don't forget about us. WWE is here on Peacock, and here's a Flair thing, and then there's more. But it's a little broader, so it's kind of for everybody, but not really. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what we're supposed to expect from this. On the Pro Wrestling Book Club, we've just watched so many of these things, and I don't even think maybe we're being nitpicky. Some people would probably classify us as such. I just think if you watch these things, you get a keener eye for what's right and what's wrong, or even what's entertaining and what's not, or what is, again, a cohesive story from A to B to C. And when something is not any of those things, it's impossible to go on this show and do anything but critique it, right?
Oh, we're definitely nitpicking, and I don't care. What else am I supposed to say?
Do we just sit there and let it wash over you? Is that the point of content? I mean, I guess it is. I guess that's what Netflix has made billions of dollars for some people doing, but it's just like I struggle with that even if we weren't doing a wrestling book club. I would still not want to just sit there and just accept it for what it is. Like the reason we started doing the show in part is we'd read books and watch documentaries and talk about them amongst ourselves and critique them and shit on them or praise them. And we're like, you know what? There's people would probably want to hear us do. I think people are doing this beyond us. I think people want to hear this.
Well, it's like when you have 2 Steve Jobs movies come out in a span of like 18 months, or like 2 Firefest docs come out in the span of like 6
or
weeks.
Or Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Maybe a little less. I see your point. Yes, I'm not going to argue, but what else can you say? Because if you squint, they're the same. So you have to. Sorry, now I'm justifying why I'm an asshole.
No, I don't think it gives us any choice but to be assholes, or again, at least critiquey or nitpicky or thoughtful is the way I would describe it on these things, and just pay them mind. Like, I don't know. I don't need. We've already said previously in the show, not everything needs to be dark side. Some things try to be dark side, and we stick our nose down, and go, oh, I don't like that. That's the wrong use of this. And not everything needs to be a cautionary tale too. Like, I don't need. Every Ric Flair story going forward doesn't have to come with a warning, like, a trigger warning, or like a reminder that this guy is bad. Like, we're able, discerning human beings can watch something like this and draw their own conclusions, whether it is explicitly stated that way or not. Like, I just don't understand how you put all these pieces into one quote-unquote package and act like it tells this guy's tale from somewhat start to finish. I just don't. He's contains contradictions. He's strange and broken for sure in a lot of ways over 70 years of so much going on to him. But I just don't really know. I just find this even the more we talk about it, I get more and more mad about it, because I'm like, what is this? Like, what is the purpose? And I can't answer that, and I can't praise something where I can't put that in a sentence or two.
To put a nice bow on all this, I think it's going to be a nice bow.
I think it's time to put a bow on it, so hopefully I think it's a good bow.
Ric Flair is a complicated man, but your documentary about him shouldn't be complicated. It should have a lens and a purpose and, to your point, a thesis. And we kind of we walked around it something, and I'm not sure what it was, but we did a lot. We were just as complicated as the guy's story who we were telling.
Yeah. I honestly hope we don't have to do another Flair story. Like, to me, I remember there was a time on the show, several times, where you or I would complain about the Montreal Screwjob or the death of WCW. We would say, we do not want to talk about this anymore. We do not want to talk about these topics that have been discussed ad nauseum by every wrestling fan for decades now. But I'm adding to that mix Ric Flair. And I would even switch up and say, I'd rather talk about the Screwjob or the death of WCW again than I would revisit the story of Ric Flair. Like, I just have no more interest in this story. Like, when he passes away, it will be sad because a person has died. People loved him, and he contributed a lot to the wrestling industry. And beyond that, I just can't do it anymore. Like, the contradictions and everything, I'm just like, thanks, Rick. Thanks for everything. Off you go. I'm done with this.
It was literally our first episode.
Yeah, it was our first episode. It was our 11th episode. It was and then 30 episodes in between, he's come up to some extent, like, it's just, and there's just not enough meat on the bone anymore to justify all that.
Yeah, I want to talk. Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about the wrestler or something in the context of wrestling with him. The end. Sorry.
Yeah. Find a new story, please. We're begging you all. It can even be another version of, again, different warmed over narratives that we've also heard. But Ric Flair, let's put a stake in that one and move on with our day, please.
You'll have to tell me.
So, this is not a treat, right? You would say this is definitively untreat worthy?
I think in a vacuum, one could argue the treat level. But there's just too much. There's just too much of the same, and it's too long, and we just had too many. It was untreatly.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think as I was watching it, finishing it last night and today, I guess in my 2-parters, I wasn't getting mad while I was watching it. I wasn't like throwing my phone or banging on the bed or the sofa. Like, I was just passively watching the Ric Flair documentary. I think when you unpack it, it becomes frustrating. But again, if you allow it to wash over you, which is technically a way to watch anything, I think it is not. It's inoffensive in broad strokes. But when you dissect it and you know the story inside and out already, I think it's hard not to get frustrated.
Yeah, you know what? The next Andre doc, we'll talk about the exact same way.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We've already had one of of
and his excuse is he's been dead for 30 years, so there's no new information coming out. So
no,
there's no reason to make that. That's definitively does not require any new information, content to be created. But I'm sure it's not going to stop people. So
I think I just accidentally greenlit that, and someone's going to listen and be like, "Hey, you know what I should pitch?"
Peacock. This Andre guy, he was real big, huh?
Yeah.
Well, if you want to watch Wu becoming Ric Flair, it is available on Peacock. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you really need a Ric Flair refresher, or if you enjoy the guy so much and his work that you don't care about all the stuff we just complained about for 40 minutes, give it a shot. But Awesome Truth does not declare it a treat, and that is our final word on the matter.
Some would say it's poopy butt.
Yes, it has strong whiffs of poopy butt without.
No, what's the opposite of not? Is it just not?
I don't
treat?
know. I think just not a treat. I don't think we've ever came. I was thinking about that recently. How we've done 150 episodes and we've never come up with any sort of like official rating system. Not that we need one. I kind of like reading like movie reviews, for example, that don't have stars, and you just like read it and you figure out by reading what the person thinks about the movie. But you think like on a podcast, everybody has a gimmick, and we've never developed a gimmick. We've never even tried to get it. Besides me saying treat a couple times and you glomming onto that.
Yeah, it's a treat. Well, it's a treat meter.
Yeah, that's true. We've never even made a treat meter though. We've always just let it be.
Yeah. Well, now I'm trying to create the bottom end of the treat meter. Poopy butt.
This is definitely poopy butts. If you want to hear more of us talk about Ric Flair in other contexts, like we said, the first episode, the 11th episode, many episodes, you can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. For new episodes, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered, we are there. And you can follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, we put the kibosh. We ended the Ric Flair story. Ric Flair is done on Awesome Truth. Knock on wood. Cross our fingers. Stick a needle in our eyes. Whatever other fairy tales we gotta say to make this come true.
It's over.
It's over.
It's done.
Well, it's over, and this episode is over. Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.